Along with the body, jewelry that Christy was wearing on the day of her disappearance was found: a thin bracelet and earrings. Traces of traumatic impact were found on the skull. In particular, cracks were recorded in the area of the left temporal bone, characteristic of a blow from a blunt object. Forensic experts came to the conclusion that the injury was received during life. Signs of pressure were found in the cervical region. Damage to the bones of the larynx, typical of strangulation with hands or compression of the neck. Also, traces of fractures were found on the ribs, which could have occurred both during the struggle and as a result of forced burial. But experts noted that their nature does not exclude their origin during life. Dear viewers, in the next video releases, you will find very intriguing and confusing cases. And in order not to miss them, be sure to subscribe to the channel and please like the video. In the heart of Silicon Valley, among the noisy highways and shining corporate buildings, a girl named Christy Lynn Wilson was born and raised. She was born on October 1, 1977, in San Jose, California, into a family that valued honesty, perseverance, and mutual assistance. Christy's parents, Debbie Boyd and Michael Wilson, tried from childhood to give their daughter not only everything she needed, but also what she couldn't buy: self-confidence, a sense of justice, and the ability to follow her own path, despite the circumstances. Although her parents' marriage did not last forever, Christy maintained a close relationship with both her mother and father, drawing strength and lessons from different sides of their character. From an early age, Christy showed herself to be an energetic, bright, and independent person. Teachers noted her lively mind, leadership qualities, and inner discipline, which are rare in teenagers. But she never lost her friendliness. Those who knew Christy personally recalled her as the person who would be the first to notice if someone was feeling lonely and would come over to just talk. She had a rare ability to be there for you in both joy and adversity, a quality that would make her an indispensable friend and colleague. After graduating from high school, Christy decided to move on. She enrolled at California Polytechnic State University in San Luis Obispo, where she earned a degree in communications. Her choice of major was natural. Christy knew how to speak, listen, analyze, and convey thoughts in a way that resonated. While studying, she earned extra money by volunteering, helping out at local organizations, and always trying to be useful. After graduating, she returned to Northern California, where she began building a career in business administration, working for companies like Adobe Systems and other corporations that dominate the region's tech landscape. Despite her busy schedule, Christy never lost her zest for life. Her friends and family remember her as an avid runner, yoga fan, classic reader, and someone who could discuss philosophical ideas and sitcom jokes with equal interest. She was not a person of extremes. Rather, she strove for balance between her career and her personal life, between the desire for success and the ability to enjoy simple moments. There was love in her life, not loud, not intrusive, but warm and genuine. Christy was in a serious relationship with a young man named Danny, with whom she shared plans for the future, including a possible move, career changes, and perhaps a family. But along with the successes in life, there were also difficulties. Christy lost her job. This was a serious blow to her, but she did not allow herself to become despondent. On the contrary, she began actively looking for new opportunities. She had an important interview scheduled in San Francisco, a chance to start a new chapter in her life. She believed that everything would work out, that difficulties were temporary, and that there would definitely be light ahead. Christy inherited this inner strength, the ability to move forward even when everything seemed to be falling apart. From her mother, who had gone through difficult life turns herself, and always taught her daughter to be resilient and believe in herself. Family was a real support for Christy. She had a particularly close relationship with her mother, Debbie. They could talk for hours on the phone, discussing everything from everyday trifles to plans for the future. Christy did not hide her feelings. She openly shared her worries, joy, dreams. It was this love, which even the darkness could not extinguish, that would become the driving force in the fight for the truth. Many remembered Christy as a woman who knew how to find a common language with a wide variety of people. She was the one who was not afraid to tell the truth, but did it with respect, the one who could provide support without asking for anything in return, and the one who always found a way to inspire others to do better. Her colleagues said they could feel an energy around her at work, not nervous or aggressive, but quiet and confident, as if she knew that whatever project came up, it could be solved if we were attentive, honest, and worked together. October 4th, 2005, began for Christy Wilson as one of those ordinary, unremarkable days that we tend to forget. Her life was full of plans, hopes, and goals. She was preparing for an important interview that was to take place the next day in San Francisco, and she saw it as a chance to start a new chapter, perhaps with a new company, with the prospects she so richly deserved. After weeks of job searching and internal stress, she decided to allow herself a little respite, and she chose the Thunder Valley Casino, a popular spot near Lincoln in Placer County. It was a spontaneous decision, a way to relax a little before the big day. Christy planned to spend no more than a couple of hours there, play blackjack, have a glass of wine, change the scenery. For her, as for many others who visited that evening, the casino was not a place of risk, but rather a ritual of distraction, a brief pause in a life where everything is subordinated to routine and anxiety. At about 6 p.m., Christy left San Jose. She was driving alone in her car, dressed tastefully, as always. Jeans and a black top, not flashy, but elegant. Her phone was lying on the seat next to her, plugged in, music playing quietly. Around 8 p.m., security cameras recorded Christy entering the casino. She walks to the gaming room, greeting the staff she already knew. An infrequent, but still regular customer. After a while, she sits down at the blackjack table. Over the next few hours, she actively plays, communicates, smiles. Her behavior is no different from the behavior of other visitors. She does not look tense or worried. Everything seemed completely normal. But the key moment comes closer to midnight. Christy, already a little tired, apparently getting ready to leave the casino. At this time, a man appears at the table next to her, a stranger with whom she starts a casual conversation. He makes a few bets, jokes, shows interest. The cameras record how the two of them laugh, talk. No one interferes. It looks quite friendly, almost harmless. However, in the following minutes, their interaction becomes closer. They leave the gaming room together, moving towards the exit. At 1:13 a.m., the cameras record how Christy leaves the casino accompanied by this man. Further events were reconstructed later from fragmentary data. But that night, none of the casino employees paid attention to the fact that something strange had happened. For them, it was a normal shift, a normal flow of visitors. No one reported the incident. No one suspected that the young woman who had just left the establishment could be in danger. And only the next morning, the story of Christy Wilson took on a completely different scale. Her boyfriend, Danny, woke up at about 7 a.m. and immediately realized that something was wrong. Christy did not return home, did not call, did not send a message. This was completely uncharacteristic for her. He dialed her number several times, but the calls went straight to voicemail. Over time, his anxiety began to turn into panic. He called her mother, Debbie Boyd. When she heard that her daughter hadn't shown up at home, she immediately knew she had to act. Neither Christy nor her phone were responding. There was no activity on social media. Her bank card wasn't being used. And she herself, according to Danny, hadn't shown the slightest hint that she was planning to leave. Around 10 a.m., relatives contacted the local San Jose Police Department. Initially, the case was registered as a missing person for an adult, and as often happens, the official response was restrained. The police clarified. Perhaps Christy left of her own free will. Perhaps she needed time. But relatives insisted. This was not her style. Christy always stayed in touch, especially before an important interview. She was organized and responsible. The police, despite the procedural caution, recorded the request and began collecting information. They contacted the Thunder Valley Casino, requested video recordings, and began to find out who Christy had spoken to on her last evening. Meanwhile, the family began their own actions. They called hospitals, morgues, fire stations, published posts on the internet, distributed photographs. Danny drove along possible routes, checking if there had been an accident. The family printed out leaflets and posted them within a radius of dozens of kilometers from Lincoln. Every hour seemed like an eternity to them. Every minute without an answer was a direct blow to the chest. The anxiety grew more and more. There was less and less hope for a simple explanation. By lunchtime the next day, police confirmed that Christie's car had been found in the casino parking lot. It was locked and appeared to be undamaged. Her keys, phone, and purse were missing. The discovery was the first warning sign for Placer County Police, who soon became involved. The disappearance was now viewed as potentially criminal. They decided to conduct a full sweep of the casino grounds, interviewing staff and other patrons. Investigators began analyzing surveillance footage to track Christie's final movements around the building and grounds. That's when they first saw the figure of a man leaving the building with her at 1:13 a.m. From that moment on, the case began to unfold in a completely new direction. But in the first 24 hours after her disappearance, all the family and investigators had was confusion, fear, and a growing sense that something far more sinister lay behind the seemingly ordinary night. The Christy Wilson case was especially alarming to investigators. This was not just the disappearance of an adult woman. This was a situation in which it was clear from the first hours that something had gone wrong. Christy did not have a habit of suddenly disappearing, not answering calls or changing plans without warning. She was organized, disciplined, and attentive. That is why her sudden disappearance on the night of October 4th to 5th, 2005, was not only a shock to her loved ones, but also a signal to the police that the case could be criminal in nature. The first steps of the investigation were focused on restoring Christie's last known route. CCTV cameras at Thunder Valley Casino became a key source of information. The video clearly showed the girl leaving the premises in the company of an unknown man. Thanks to details of clothing, gait, and other signs, investigators were able to quickly establish his identity. It turned out to be Mario Garcia. His name had not previously appeared in police reports, and at first glance, he did not arouse suspicion. A respected healthcare worker, a father of 3, a stable life in Auburn, it seemed like a profile that would be unlikely to be involved in the disappearance. But upon closer examination of Garcia's profile, disturbing details began to emerge. Investigators had doubts after their first interview with him. His version of events was vague and inconsistent. He claimed that he left the casino with Christy. They talked for a while near her car, and then she left. However, there was no video evidence of Christy getting into her car. Moreover, the car itself was found later, but on the opposite side of the supposed exit. This inconsistency seemed suspicious to investigators. Even more alarming was Garcia's condition the day after his disappearance. When he was first interviewed, he had fresh scratches on his face and body. He explained that he had injured himself while repairing furniture, but investigators knew that such injuries often occur during physical struggle. Forensic experts recorded the damage and photographed it. The next step in the investigation was to obtain a search warrant for Garcia's car, and this was the turning point. Hair and drops of blood were found in the trunk of his car. DNA testing confirmed that they belonged to Christy Wilson. This meant that after leaving the casino, she was in his car, and in a state that resulted in blood loss. Christy had never met Garcia before and had no personal or professional ties to him. Therefore, logic dictated one thing: something illegal had happened in the car, and Garcia was the only one who could know what exactly. However, even with this evidence, the investigation faced significant difficulties. The main one was the lack of a body. Without a body, the prosecutor's office could not directly prove the fact of murder, and the defense could claim that Christy was alive, but was hiding for some reason. Such theories appeared in the media. Someone claimed that she had run away. Someone, that she could have been the victim of an accident. But her bank accounts, phone, driver's license, everything remained motionless. None of her friends or relatives heard from her. And most importantly, according to her relatives, she would never have left her mother. This argument became the cornerstone of understanding Christy's motives and character. In an attempt to gather additional information, investigators turned to Garcia's circle. His wife, who initially defended her husband, became increasingly distant with each passing day. Relatives and neighbors began to recall oddities in his behavior. He became withdrawn, irritable, and avoided talking about what had happened. Some recalled that on the night of Christy's disappearance, the lights were on in his house until the early hours, and that in the morning he looked tired and tense. One of the neighbors reported hearing him digging something in the yard behind the house, although he usually did not do this. But at that time, this information did not seem specific enough. The investigation, despite the absence of a body, did not stop. The police conducted numerous searches, including Garcia's property and adjacent wooded areas, but all were fruitless. They used search dogs, helicopters, even volunteers, but Christie's tracks seemed to disappear. The girl's mother, Debbie Boyd, did not give up. She regularly appeared in the media, organized events in her daughter's memory, and even conducted her own investigation, gathering information unavailable to the police. It was her persistence that kept the case from fading from public view. By 2006, investigators had collected enough evidence to charge Mario Garcia with first-degree murder, despite the absence of a body. This decision was not easy. The jury had to believe in guilt without a key element, without a victim. But detailed examinations, inconsistencies in Garcia's stories, his behavior after the disappearance, and DNA evidence made him the main and only suspect. Investigators built a chain of evidence based on circumstantial but convincing data. They believed that even if a body was not found, this did not mean that the crime did not take place, and Garcia was the person who knew what happened that night. However, the closeness of the Garcia family, legal protection, and the lack of direct witnesses did not allow the case to be brought to a quick conclusion. It took months for the investigation to conduct all the examinations, prepare the materials, and build a case so that it would withstand the pressure from the defense. A team of prosecutors specializing in cases without a body was created, and it was their experience that brought the case to trial. But the story of Christy Wilson's investigation took a new turn almost 15 years later. In 2020, one of Garcia's sons, now an adult, remembered details of the night that he had previously ignored. How his father told him and his brother not to leave the room. How he heard digging outside the window. How the backyard looked different in the morning. This information forced the police to return to Garcia's property, which has since changed hands. Using ground-penetrating radar, violations were recorded in the ground. On August 16, 2020, excavations began. The earth was removed in layers, carefully, manually, so as not to damage possible evidence. Within an hour and a half, a team of investigators discovered human remains at a depth of about a meter. Everything indicated that the body had lain in the ground for more than 1 year. It was wrapped in cloth, partially decomposed, but retaining key features needed for identification. Bones, fragments of clothing and material that could preserve DNA were removed. And that's when, 14 years, 10 months, and 21 days after she went missing, Christy Wilson's body was found. The remains were buried shallowly, next to the roots of an old tree. The jewelry Christy was wearing on the day she went missing was found with the body, a thin bracelet and earrings. These items confirmed the identity before lab tests were completed. The forensic examination lasted several weeks. The main task was not only to establish the identity, but also to determine the cause of death, the nature of the injuries, and the possible circumstances of the murder. An examination of the skeleton made it possible to highlight key points. Traces of traumatic impact were found on the skull. In particular, cracks characteristic of a blunt blow were recorded in the area of the left temporal bone. Forensic experts came to the conclusion that the injury was received during life and could have been the cause of death, or one of them. Signs of pressure were found in the cervical region. Damage to the laryngeal bones, typical of manual strangulation or neck compression. These signs do not always persist after burial, but in this case they were pronounced enough to be officially recorded. Also on the ribs were traces of fractures that could have occurred both during the struggle and as a result of forced burial, but experts noted that their nature does not exclude their origin during life. Taken together, this led to the conclusion that Christy Wilson died from violence, most likely as a result of blunt force trauma to the head and/or strangulation. The experts indicated that this was not an accidental injury, but rather an act committed with force and the intent to cause fatal harm. Moreover, no signs were found that indicated suicide or an accident. The clothing recovered with the remains matched the description given by Christy's mother in the first days after her disappearance. This also confirmed that the body had not been moved. It was immediately buried in the place where it was found years later. The discovered fabric and soil around the body were sent for chemical analysis. Remarkably, the soil contained microparticles that matched the composition of the materials previously found in the trunk of Garcia's car. This technically linked the burial site to the transportation of the body in his car, which played a key role in the legal consolidation of evidence. One of the most astonishing facts was that the body had lain just a few feet from the windows of the house where his children had lived. All these years. Under a layer of earth, under bushes, in the shade of a tree, next to which children had run, parties had taken place, a lawnmower had been working. Forensic psychologists would later call this one of the most sinister elements of the case, the realization of how carefully the killer had hidden death in everyday life. For investigators, the results of the examination were the last missing link that would close the case forever. They proved Christy Wilson had been murdered. Murdered with force, with intent. And then the body was hidden. Her mother, Debbie Boyd, said quietly but firmly, "Now I know where my daughter is. She's not in limbo anymore." This discovery marked the end of the investigation, but not the end of the story. There was a trial ahead, and although the body had finally been found, the answers, why, how, for what, remained as frighteningly unclear as on the first day. At this point, the prosecution gained new momentum. The discovery of Christie's body was a key link that strengthened the existing evidence base. The prosecution had what it had been missing since 2005, direct confirmation that Christie was dead and that her death was not accidental. This put an end to speculation about whether she could have voluntarily disappeared. Now, prosecutors were preparing to retry the case in full, with corroborated physical evidence. The trial was taking place in Placer County. By this point, Mario Garcia was already serving his sentence, having been convicted of Christie's murder back in 2006 based on circumstantial evidence. However, the discovery of the body opened the door to a retrial and new charges, and it finally strengthened the prosecution's case. Prosecutors used this new phase of the trial to reconstruct the entire events of that night, from Christie's exit from the casino to her final moments. The focus was on the chronology, the defendant's behavior, physical evidence, and witness testimony, including his own son. The prosecution presented the court with a complete sequence of events. Casino footage clearly showed Christie and Garcia playing at the same table, flirting and chatting. After midnight, they left the room together. Then came the moment when cameras recorded them walking toward the parking lot. The footage in the parking lot stopped, and from that moment on, Christie's whereabouts became unknown. The next thing that appeared in the case file was traces of Christie's blood and hair in the trunk of Garcia's car, scratches on his face and chest, a rug with biological traces in his house, and now, a body found. The defense tried to object. Garcia's lawyers insisted on the lack of an obvious motive, argued that the relationship between Garcia and Christie was coincidental, and that the discovery of her remains on his former property could not serve as the only evidence of intent. However, their arguments sounded less and less convincing. Given the body of evidence, from DNA testing to the defendant's behavior in the days following her disappearance, the defense's version did not look like an alternative hypothesis, but rather an attempt to delay the inevitable. Mario Garcia did not admit his guilt either during the investigation or in court. He denied any involvement in the disappearance and death of Christy Wilson throughout the entire trial, from 2005 until the very end. His defense was based on the fact that he allegedly broke up with Christy in a casino parking lot and did not know what happened to her next. When her body was found on his former property in 2020, even after that, Garcia did not give any confession or explain the motive for the crime. As for the possible motive, the investigation and the prosecution put forward the following version. Garcia, being married and the father of 3 children, met Christy at the casino that night. He flirted with her, possibly trying to persuade her to have sex. But when she most likely refused or expressed dissatisfaction with his behavior, this caused an outburst of aggression in him. There are circumstantial indications that there was a struggle between them, possibly in the car. Traces of scratches on his face and chest, blood in the trunk, Christy's hair in the car and her body, later found buried on his property. All this confirmed that the conflict ended in a violent murder committed under extreme emotional stress. Christy's mother, Debbie, was again in the courtroom. Everything that she had gone through over these years, sleepless nights, searches, media pressure, conversations with reporters, volunteer groups, the pressure of disappointment, all concentrated in these days of the trial. She listened to expert testimony, looked at photographs of evidence, met the eyes of the man whom she considered responsible for the death of her daughter. And although the body was found and the truth seemed to triumph, for her it was not a triumph, but the end of a long and exhausting struggle. The jury deliberated briefly. By an overwhelming majority, they found Mario Garcia guilty. The judge ruled that the final sentence was life in prison without parole. That decision meant that Garcia would never walk free again. A few months after the verdict, he died in prison from complications of COVID-19 pneumonia. For Christie's family, that day was not a celebration. It was a day of silence. A day to finally stop searching, stop doubting, stop asking. Christy had come home. And though her life had been cut brutally short, her memory remained, in the people who refused to let her story disappear, in the mother who refused to give up, and in the justice that, despite years of silence, was finally served.